So today we're going to talk about Florida's owls, everybody. If I could get a quick show of hands, how many people here love owls and that's why you tuned in today? Oh, good. At least half of you. That's really exciting. All right. Thank you, everyone, for showing me that you're interested in owls. I'm glad to have you here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and talk a little bit about an owl's role in the ecosystem. We're going to cover some common species that you'll see in Florida, and we'll also talk a little bit about owl conservation. So you've indicated via raising your hands that you're interested in owls. At the end of this webinar, you'll learn what you can do as a resident of Florida or a visitor to Florida if you're not a resident, what you can do to help our owls here in Florida. So the owls that we have here, they are very highly effective raptors. So most people, when they think of owls, they think of storybook characters or cartoon characters, or they think of the birds of prey that owls really are. And they have some favorite prey depending on the size of the owl. Our larger owls will go after a lot of rodents and mammals. Now, what surprises some people are the specific prey items that different owl species go after, and we'll talk about those as we get into the different species. But the smaller owls, they eat little things. You know, you're a small owl, you can't really take down a large bunny rabbit or anything. So you're going to go after insects like grasshoppers, some small lizards, tree frogs, and earthworms. But before we get started, we're going to have a little poll question. So let's go ahead and do that. You should see a poll popping up on your screen now. And the question says, how many rodents per year are barn owls in the Everglades agricultural area estimated to eat? And the options are 300, 600, 1,000, or 3,000. I'm sorry, I need to launch the poll question. Okay, now you can pick what you think it is. All right, and we'll give it just a couple more seconds, see if we can get a few more answers here. Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Okay, I'll go ahead and share those results for you. So the majority of you did guess correctly, and that is approximately 3,000 rodents per year. Now this is it's an estimate for a barn owl in the Everglades area, but it's hard for us to know exactly how many rodents a particular owl species or cluster of owls is eating. So the way that they found this information is they analyzed a lot of owl pellets over time to try and figure out what percentage of their diet were rodents and how many rodent skeletons they were finding in those owl pellets. Let's go ahead and keep going. So if we keep that number in mind, the 3,000 rodents over the course of a year, that's for an individual, that's a nesting pair of barn owls. Now, when we think about rodent populations, we tend to think about things that are problematic to society. So we think about rats that could be roof rats or Norway rats or other mice in that family that as humans or as society tends to think of as problem species. But it includes other species as well, like voles and moles and things like that. So owls, being the wonderful predators that they are, they really help keep that population in check. Now, anyone who's familiar with the number of owls that live in their area, if you start to add that number together, you start to get a feel for how many rodents would be in our area if there were not owls. And owls are pretty stealthy. Most people don't know how many owls live near them. So if we start to think about it on a larger scale, what would a barn owl family consume? So it's estimated that barn owls have multiple clutches per year. They could have up to 3 nests succeed throughout the year. So that breeding pair might be consuming 6,000 to 9,000 rodents per breeding season, which is just one breeding pair, and it's an estimate there. But that is a lot of rodents, and when you think about that owl population, that number really does start to grow. So think about how our rodent populations might grow if we did not have the owls that we do. And to illustrate what good predators they are, we're going to watch a quick video. So in this video, we're going to look out for the owl's reputation for being a silent but deadly predator. So we're going to watch the short video which compares the relative sound of a pigeon, a falcon, and a barn owl, and the noise they make when they fly.
Good girl.
Moses. Mo.
And now, it's Kenz's turn.
So as you could see there was absolutely no noise when the barn owl flew by. And the reason for that is the feather shapes that they have. They're a little more rugged around the edges of the feathers. They're very soft feathers with frilled edges, and it allows them to fly very silently. So if you're interested in watching the rest of that video, it's part of an owl documentary that the BBC put together. We will put that video link in our resources email that you'll get after this. So hold on to your seats. We're going to have another poll question. And this one is going live now. So the question asks, how many species of owls are considered threatened by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission? So in the state of Florida, how many species do we have on the threatened species list? The answers are 1, 2, 3, or 4. And it looks like we've got almost everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share your results. So the answer to this question is actually only one species. Now I'm talking about species that live here year round, and we have one species on the Florida threatened species list. And so let's learn about some of those species. So the 5 species that we're going to talk about today are the barred owl, the barn owl, the great horned owl, the burrowing owl, and the eastern screech owl. And you'll learn which one is threatened in just a few minutes. But these are the 5 commonly referred to as year-round species here in Florida. There are a few others, 4 or 5, I believe, that will visit the state occasionally on their migratory patterns, or if the weather is particularly odd that year, you might get some rogue owls showing up in your area. The first one we're going to talk about is the great horned owl. This is your quintessential owl. If you think about storybook owls, this is who you're thinking of. They tend to be 18 to 25 inches tall. The female is larger than the male, but the male has a larger voice box and a deeper call. So you can identify them if you get really skilled in identifying owl calls by their voice. Now they're pretty easy to identify in Florida. They have those long ear tufts that you see there. They're not actually their ears, but they look a lot like ears, so we call them ear tufts. They have that bright yellow stare, and like I said, they are that quintessential storybook owl. Their range is really throughout Florida and North America. They prefer wooded areas all across the nation, but they don't really have a preferred forest type nationwide. In local areas, they may have a preferred forest type, but it will really revolve around what prey species is most preferred in that local area. You can really find them in urban parks, secluded forests, mountain ranges. You can find them pretty much everywhere. They do also have the most diverse diet of all of our North American raptors. They'll take down anything from a scorpion, a little scorpion, all the way up to an osprey or other birds of prey. They have even been known to perch over water and hunt for fish and crustaceans in shallow water as well, which was news to me. But I really hope I get to see that one day. In their nesting, they do usually adopt an older nest from another species, perhaps from a hawk or an osprey, but they don't really do much to it. They might add a little bit to it if it's starting to fall apart, but they'll usually just adopt an older nest in that way. While they are quite common, the North American Breeding Bird Survey has indicated that their populations may have declined as much as 33% since 1966. But they still are a very common bird that you can hear on a regular basis. So we'll go ahead and listen to their call. Okay. And so that call is pretty distinct, and a lot of people have heard it in their area parks. Now, their ear tufts, just one final thing, are one of the easiest things to identify from afar. So this is a picture that Lara took, and this is a nest that's up in a pine tree snag. And you can see the fuzzy little young guys here, but those ear tufts from afar create quite the Batman silhouette that makes it really easy to tell if you're looking at a great horned owl in Florida. This silhouette's also easy to tell at dusk. So if you're likely to see them, it's likely to be at dusk. So the next species we're going to talk about are the barred owls. These little guys are between 16 and 24 inches tall usually, and they do not have the ear tufts that the great horned owl has. You can identify them by their mottled brown and white feathers, and it's a little hard to tell in this picture, but they tend to have vertical brown bars. They look almost like prison bars on their chest there, and that's where they get their name from. So their range is also throughout Florida, and they eat a varied diet of rodents and other birds. They live year-round in the forest that they stay in, and they are territorial year-round. So they will be more aggressive during the breeding season and the nesting season, but they are thought to mate for life, and they fiercely defend their territory. They usually raise one brood per year. They'll have up to 5 eggs in that clutch, and they are also very commonly heard at night. We can listen here. All right, I think it goes again. So barred owls will usually nest in a natural cavity at least 20 feet in the air. They will use platform nests abandoned by other species as well, but they do prefer cavity nesting. And it's thought that they will seek out their new cavity nest if they need a new one as much as a year in advance. And research is still out on whether it's the male or the female who makes that ultimate choice on nest site. An interesting fact about the barred owl is that the great horned owl is actually its greatest predatory threat. So if a barred owl is hanging out in its territory and a great horned owl comes in to start hunting, the barred owl will move to another part of its territory and let the great horned owl have its run of the place. Good news is, while they are fairly common, the North American Bird Breeding Survey has indicated that their populations have increased 1.5% since 1966. So the third species we're going to talk about today is the barn owl. This is the one we talked about earlier who eats all those rodents per year. They're slightly smaller at 14 to 21 inches, but they look vastly different. So you can identify them by this white heart-shaped face that they have here. They've got a tawny ring around it. It makes them almost look like they've got a heart-shaped satellite dish on their face. And that allows them to be such skilled hunters there. They've also got buff and gray feathers, that tawny color with gray feathering on their back, and they're a smaller, more lightweight looking bird than the barred or the great horned owl. They also live in nest cavities throughout Florida, and they're predominantly going after rodents. Excuse me. The difference here is that the barn owl prefers open habitat. So they'll be looking at grasslands, marshes, agricultural fields, forests that are like the edge of a forest where their prey might come out from the forest. But they'll also be interested in cities and urban areas if they've got large park-like areas that have been maintained or mowed. They're better at hunting in those areas. They get their name barn owl because they tend to roost in cavities as well as abandoned or open structures like a barn. They have also been known to breed and roost up in Yankee Stadium, so they are not super discriminate when it comes to a nesting area. Additionally, they are not territorial. So you might have a large number of barn owls all taking up in the same general area. And this is something that our agricultural friends are very interested in. So there's a lot of research going on right now about putting up nest boxes for the barn owl to improve their predatory, not instincts, but improve the amount that they're predating on agricultural pests like field mice, cotton mice, and rats. So their nesting strategy is not the most elegant. The female will make a very simple nest, which is created of her own regurgitated owl pellets. Sorry if you're eating lunch right now. I will not be showing a video of any owls eating, so rest assured that's fine. But the female will make that nest out of regurgitated pellets. She'll shred it up with her feet, and then she'll arrange it into a cup-like shape. Unlike most other bird species, the barn owl will use that nesting site year-round. They're thought to use it for roosting. And after she lays her clutch of eggs, she'll start stashing food in the nest for when the young hatch. So one of the reasons people don't like them is the smell that can start to accumulate. But if you've put them in an area, if you put your box or your barn in an area where it's not populated by a lot of people all the time, they really do provide a wonderful service. There are a lot of urban myths about this bird. A lot of our local cultures here consider it a bad omen if you see one of these at sunset. They're also known as the ghost owl, and part of that is their rather uncomfortable noise that they make. So they don't make a typical hooting noise. They screech more like it. So let's go ahead and listen to it here. Yeah. So it's not the most attractive noise that a bird could make, but that screech can be really eerie, and it won't stop. But that screech can be really eerie if you're alone in the woods, or if you're working and you've got a barn that you're trying to clean out or something. If you're not expecting it, you could see how it would be really unnerving. So let's move on to the next little owl. This is a personal favorite of mine. This is the eastern screech owl. He's Florida's smallest owl, and he stands somewhere between 6 and 9 inches tall as a mature adult. As you can see, that little guy is sitting on someone's fist, and he is just barely larger than it. He does have adorable little ear tufts, and for their size, their head is quite large. They've got a stocky build. They almost have no neck. Those ear tufts are a great way to identify them if you see them swooping around in your backyard. And you can find them in 3 different colors. They can be red, a darkish reddish brown, or a gray. They're considered morphs of the same species. And there is some geographic limits to where these colors are found, but you can see all 3 of them in the state of Florida. For instance, in southern Texas, they only have the gray morph of the eastern screech owl. But here you can see all 3. I usually see the gray or the brown. I've not seen a red in the wild, but I look forward to doing so at some point. They feed primarily on smaller prey. It makes sense. They're a small bird. So they'll go after grasshoppers, lizards, frogs, earthworms are a particular favorite if they can get them. But on a rare occasion, they might even go after a songbird or songbird hatchlings that they might come across. Now, if you look in this second picture we have at the bottom here, if you haven't found him yet, our little screech owl friend is right here in the crook of this tree. Their feathers provide wonderful camouflage for them. And sometimes if they're sticking their head out of a little cavity, they'll actually fluff their feathers around the outside of the cavity so it helps them blend in with the tree's bark. But if you don't know they're there, it's very hard to find them. You're more likely going to hear them, much like our other owls. So let's listen to their in my opinion, adorable little noise. So this is known as the eastern screech owl's trill, T-R-I-L-L, trill. And it sounds a little bit like a horse, and it can be really unexpected if people aren't used to it. But that is the noise that the eastern screech owl tends to make most often. There's not really a habitat that they prefer more over the other. They're quite common in anywhere that has some sufficient tree cover. So it could be backyards, parks, cities, open areas. They're pretty common in all of those different areas there. Now, the eastern screech owls are thought to be monogamous, and they are thought to remain together for life. But the males will defend a small territory, which may have several different cavities for roosting and nesting. So they will use those roosts, and they'll stick their little faces out of the roost and kind of keep watch and hang out. But they still are most active at night as far as hunting. The eastern screech owls, they don't actually build a nest in the cavities that they have. They just kind of lay the eggs in whatever's already in that cavity. There might be wood chips or twigs or feathers from a past nesting season or from another critter like a squirrel, but they don't really build a nest per se. Eastern screech owls can lay one brood per year of 2 to 6 eggs, and they will never build their own cavity. So they need a cavity that already exists. That could be in a snag that's had a branch rot out. It could be something that was opened up by a woodpecker or a squirrel, but they're not going to be able to build their own cavity. When they're nesting, the female will stay with the clutch the whole time. She will leave very briefly at dawn and dusk to get some food, but predominantly the male of the family will go bring food back to the young, and the female will rip it up into smaller pieces to feed the babies. And the last species we're going to talk about is that threatened species I mentioned earlier. So this is the Florida burrowing owl. Most people are surprised to find out that they are found across the peninsula of Florida, but their populations are considered local and spotty. So if you have them, you probably have a few different areas that have them. And if you don't have them, it's probably because the habitat isn't ideal for them. They are also quite small. They generally are less than 9 inches tall, and they do not have ear tufts. So if you're in an area that has eastern screech owls and burrowing owls, they could be confused if they were both sitting on a fence post next to each other. But a good sign that they are not the same bird is that the burrowing owl doesn't have those ear tufts and has those bright yellow eyes like the great horned owl does. Their prey is predominantly grasshoppers, mole crickets, cockroaches, lizards, and small frogs. They eat a lot of earthworms as well, just like the eastern screech owl does. But because they eat so many insects and they have a lot of young, they are great in urban areas because they can really help keep that pest insect population under control. They prefer open treeless areas. So in a way, some, and I say this hesitantly, some human development and growth can be advantageous to this bird. So keeping green areas for cattle pastures, for instance, keeps a lot of habitat open for these little birds because they really do prefer that open grassland type area. And the reason for that is because they're mostly on the ground, is that they want to see a predator if it's coming. They have also been known to use burrows in airports and abandoned lots, cemeteries, all sorts of urban environments, but historically they would have been found in open grasslands of Florida and that were probably maintained by fire. So they use these burrows year-round. It's not just a nesting burrow. They will stay in them for protection. They will raise their young in them, but they are there year-round. Another unique feature of the burrowing owl is that they're active during the day and night. So if you have local burrowing owls and you can view them without disturbing them, you might be able to see them at dawn or dusk or even in the middle of the day. They raise one brood per year, but unlike some of our other species, they usually lay up 6 to 8 eggs. So it's a pretty big clutch. Barn owls will also lay a similar number of eggs per clutch. But the burrowing owl will, sorry, excuse me again. They'll lay those eggs in the back of that burrow. Now they can dig their own burrows. They prefer to start with a burrow that's already existing though. They'll use a gopher tortoise burrow that's been abandoned or an old armadillo hole. And they'll often line that burrow, like the walls of it, with grass clippings or feathers, manure, their own droppings, all sorts of things like that. And they'll just be in it year round. So the Florida burrowing owl, like I said, it is a Florida threatened species as classified by the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. This means that taking or possessing any part of the owls, their nests, or their eggs is illegal under state law. And they are also protected by the Migratory Bird Treaty, as are other owls. And that means that their eggs and young are protected. So we're going to watch another little video. And this is the reason we're watching this video is I wanted you to see how animated these birds can be and how urban some of their burrows can be. And we're just going to watch a few seconds of it. These are another favorite species of mine. And listen closely. This is the only way I was able to get their sound for you. Sorry about that. So that noise gets me every time, his little chatter. In the background, this is in Cape Coral, Florida. In the background here, you can see a bunch of housing. There's a road that goes by right here. You'll see some cars go by. Now, something that they've done to help the landscaping crews and the people developing in this area know where the burrow is they've added this post with some flagging on it. So this is really distinctive of their feathering pattern. They're modeled all over, similar sort of to the barred owl, but this white chin and his white eyebrows are very indicative of this species. They do tend to stay near their burrows, and they'll have their head just on a swivel, looking around and chattering. There are lots of fun videos of burrowing owls in Florida if you're interested in that sort of thing. So here again, you can see they've outlined the area with the burrow so that lawn mowing equipment and other such machines do not crush the burrow. So what are the biggest threats to owl conservation in Florida? We are going to have a poll question to talk about one of them, which I might have just given it away. Sorry, Lara. So true or false, the use of rat poison is considered a significant threat to owl populations in Florida. All right, and I'll give it one more second. All right, thank you, everyone. So the majority of you got it correct. Rat poisons and other rodenticides are considered a significant threat to our owl populations. And the reason for that is the way that a lot of these rat poisons work is that they will stay in the carcass. And so after the owls eat the rats, either while they are still living or if they're of the varieties that will eat them after they've died, that rodenticide will stay in the owls' bodies as well, and they can get poisoned just the same way. So another major threat, though, is the loss of habitat. And so you can help with that by leaving old snags. A snag is a dead tree that has not fallen. If it's in an area where it wouldn't create a danger to you or others, you can leave those snags. They provide a lot of habitat for a lot of different species, not excluding our owl cavity nesters and our nesters that like to build a platform. You can also consider adding some artificial nesting habitat. But a big one that a lot of people can do is to avoid the use of rodent poisons and bait. Now, coming from an area where I live on the water and I have fruit trees that are a challenge to keep up with, there are rats outside. And I would absolutely love to be guilt-free about using rat poison, but I will not allow my husband to do it, because right after we moved in, we had an owl die in our backyard that I suspect had died due to rat poisoning. He had a lot of the characteristics of a bird of prey that was suffering from that. And so I started doing a lot of research about it and talked to some colleagues, and this is something that is considered nationwide to be an issue. Now, the problem is, to research it is quite expensive. So there was a study done in Massachusetts at Tufts University at the Tufts Wildlife Clinic, and they looked at 161 birds that had been brought into the clinic between 2006 and 2010. And of those birds, 86% of them tested positive for anticoagulant rodenticides. So that's a very common type of rodent poison. And of those 139 birds that tested positive, only 9 of them displayed enough symptoms to actually have been given the diagnosis of dying from anticoagulant rodent poison. And what is suspected in this is that it costs between $100 and $200 to get a bird tested for this type of poisoning. And in addition, a lot of people don't bring in dead birds that they find. I mean, we don't want the public picking up dead birds that they're finding and bringing them in. So only if a bird had died in a weird way or died in someone's backyard, or if several of them had died at one time, would these birds normally get tested. So we suspect the evidence and the research points to the idea that rodent baits may be causing a much larger problem than we actually know, because it is so challenging to research it. But the best way that you, as a resident of Florida, can help, besides avoiding rat poison when possible, is to consider putting up some artificial habitat. Now, I need to move through these pretty quickly, but I'm going to go ahead and let you know that we're going to include links to all of the nest box plans in the email that we will send as a follow-up. So we have 3 species that we talked about today. They're cavity nesters. That is the eastern screech owl, barred owl, and barn owl. We have a platform nester, which is your great horned owl, and the burrowing nester, which is your burrowing owl. So for your nest boxes, your barn owls prefer a large box on top of a pole with a hole off to the side. Like I said, we have plans we'll send out that have specific dimensions of the box if you're interested in putting one up. The pictures you're seeing here are University of Florida pictures of nest boxes that were put up in the Everglades agricultural area for that research I mentioned earlier. For your barred owl and your eastern screech owl, they prefer smaller boxes, which are mounted on trees or poles. I'd like to point out that this little circle right here is if you're trying to attract squirrels. If you're trying to attract screech owls, you do not want to have that hole there, because the squirrels will rob the screech owls of their eggs. You're going to have a smaller hole, about 3 inches, I believe, right here. And you're going to need to wire it shut or use a little hook. And we've got plans for both of these to send you. Our great horned owl is a platform nester, so if you're really looking to help them out, this unique nesting system that you can put up for them, it's essentially chicken wire with landscaping cloth in it to form like a large ice cream cone, and you put a bunch of sticks. You basically build a nest for them, and then you put it up in the crook of a tree. I would not expect most people to do this, because you're most likely going to get an osprey or something else. There are a lot of nesting sites for great horned owls, at least in my area of Central Florida, because of osprey nests and eagle nests. So unless you have a large piece of property with the perfect tree to keep this so that it won't fall into your backyard or something like that, this would be a more challenging nest to do. And what you see behind this little owl is what is called a T-perch. We're not going to watch this video, but this little T-perch right here, or a pole off the side of the nest, is great perching habitat for a burrowing owl. We have a few more recommendations for burrowing owls if you live in areas where you know that they frequent. If you know you've got burrowing owls in your area, like Cape Coral does, you can actually cut a section of turf grass out of your yard and dig a small hole and put a T-perch up, and you might be able to attract them to your area. And there are some recommendations from Florida Fish and Wildlife that we can send out to you. So in conclusion, owls are important rodent and mammal predators. If we try to think about the number of armadillos and rats and other things that might become much more populous if these birds of prey were not here, you can quickly imagine the important role that they play in our ecosystem. We have 5 species common to Florida year-round, and they're listed here. And finally, you can help all of the owls in our area by providing artificial habitat in the form of nest boxes, or by educating your friends and neighbors about the potential harms that rodent poisons can have on our area birds of prey. So I'd like to thank you so much for joining us on this website.